Since last week's Supreme Court ruling, I've noticed that my Facebook timeline has exploded with rainbows all over it. Fortunately for me, most of my friends are allies and supporters of the LGBT community, and they all seem to be giddy with excitement. When Mark and I announced our engagement on Facebook, we received more likes than either of us had ever experienced. It was all very affirming. But that's not the way it has been for everyone. Instead of rainbows and congratulations, a lot of people have experienced an eruption of hateful rhetoric from people on the other side of the marriage equality fence. Some have even lost their friends over the issue, both on Facebook and in real life. One person expressing concern over the backlash in Christian conservative communities described it as the most hateful, barbaric, and desperate he had seen since the outbreak of AIDS, when those same communities responded with violent hatred rather than compassion. When people attack you because of how you present yourself or who you love, especially when those people are family members, people whose support you thought you could depend on, when you are rejected by these people, it's easy to become discouraged, even bitter and resentful, returning their hate-filled words with a few of your own. But before you do, just remember you're not alone. You're not the only one who has ever experienced rejection. Remember, Jesus had bad days too. Our reading opens up with one of those bad days, when Jesus was checking in with his hometown. Everyone seemed glad to see him at first. So glad, in fact, that they invited him to share a word or two with them at the local synagogue. And that's when everything changed. As he began to speak the truth as it had been revealed to him, people began to squirm in their seats, looking sideways at their neighbors to see if they also felt the same discomfort that they themselves were experiencing. Jesus was a carpenter, for goodness sake. And here he was pretending to be a rabbi, spouting off teachings as if they were his own words. They knew who he was. They knew his family. Jesus no longer seemed to be who they remembered him to be. He no longer fit their mold of the hometown boy. Some of you may have noticed it makes people uncomfortable when we no longer fit the mold they have created for us. When transgender folk begin to reveal their authentic selves, they need to be ready for reactions like Jesus received. Wait a second. I knew you when. You just need to stop pretending you're someone who you are not. You get back into the mold that I'm comfortable with, and I don't want to hear another word about it. Or, don't try and tell me you're bisexual. You're just going through a phase. If you want to tell me you're exploring your sexuality, that's one thing, but you just need to decide one way or the other. Or, just stop with all the nonsense that your behavior is pleasing in God's sight. And don't tell me that God created gays and lesbians. You know better than to spout off that sort of foolishness. Everyone knows it's an abomination. It says so right here in the Bible. When we no longer fit the mold that society imposed on us, and we step out of these molds, otherwise known as closets, people get uncomfortable with us. They even take offense, just as they took offense with Jesus. So much so that his words and deeds had very little effect in his hometown. Now, it would have been easy for Jesus to decide to throw in the towel at this point, but he didn't. Instead of going back to his carpentry and behaving himself, he changed tactics. If they wouldn't listen to him, maybe they would listen to his disciples. So he organized them into teams and sent them out with these instructions. First, he ordered them to take nothing for their journey except a staff. No bread, no bag, no money in their belts, to wear sandals, but not to put on 2 tunics. In effect, Jesus was sending them out without protection that most people would expect. They were vulnerable. What you saw was what you got. They were not trying to pretend to be someone who they were not. In the immortal words of Dr. Seuss, who I consider to be one of the great philosophers of our time, be who you are and say what you feel, because those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind. In other words, be authentic. We're not going to do ourselves or God any good if we go around trying to be someone who we are not. Living out our lives authentically and being true to the person God has created us to be may be the greatest testimony we can give to the world. Allowing the world to see us in all of our vulnerable glory honors God. In so doing, we join voice with the psalmist who wrote, "It was you who formed my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works." The next instruction Jesus gave to his disciples was, whenever you enter a house, stay there until you leave the place. Don't move from house to house. Resist the temptation to look for greener pasture. In other words, stay focused. You will hear arguments that might sound very convincing, but listen to your heart. God has placed within each of us a spark of truth. Fan that spark into flames that set your spirit on fire. Settle into yourself. Open yourself to the still small voice of God. It's speaking to you. It says, "You are my beloved child, in whom I am well pleased." It says, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." God looks on the masterpiece that God has created and proclaims you to be very good. This dwelling place, this house of truth, is the one God has chosen for you. Don't look elsewhere. Stay in this house of truth and don't be distracted by the words of detractors. And finally, Jesus told his disciples, if people reject you, then don't think twice about leaving. Move on and don't let anything, not the dust on your feet or the words of their mouths, cling to you. Don't hang around where you aren't wanted. Sometimes we just have to let go of the people who are unable to give us the love we need. When we do, then we become open to the family that God has prepared for us. Sometimes we have to shake off the dust from our feet and move on. And if there's any better advice that Jesus gave his disciples than this, I don't know what it is. Shake it off. For the love of God, shake it off and move on. May God bless us all with the courage to be authentic, the ears to stay tuned to God's love for us, and the good sense to shake it off when our truth is rejected. Amen.